The full moon cast an eerie glow over the dense forest as the carriage rolled along the cobbled path. Thomas Grayson peered out from behind the curtain, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The letter he had received weeks ago had been cryptic, an urgent plea from an old acquaintance, Elias Moore, who claimed that Black Hollow, his childhood village, had been gripped by an unrelenting terror. "Elias, what have you gotten me into this time?" The horses neighed nervously, their breath visible in the cold night air. The coachman, an elderly man with a grizzled beard, glanced over his shoulder.
"Not much farther now, sir. Strange folk in Black Hollow these days. Best you keep your wits about you."
Thomas nodded, clutching the letter in his pocket. He had spent years as an investigative journalist, exposing frauds and unraveling mysteries. But this was something else. Tales of shadows that moved on their own, voices whispering from empty homes, and villagers disappearing without a trace had drawn him here. "I've faced worse, I think. This place won't break me." As the village came into view, an unnatural stillness settled over the land. The houses, old and weather-worn, leaned against one another as if in whispered conspiracy. Lanterns flickered weakly, their glow barely piercing the thick fog that rolled between the buildings. Thomas stepped down from the carriage, his boots crunching against the damp gravel. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic. A single figure emerged from the gloom, wrapped in a heavy cloak.
"Thomas, you came."
Elias Moore's face was gaunt, his eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. He grasped Thomas's hand with surprising strength, his fingers ice cold. "Elias, your letter was troubling. What exactly is happening here?"
"Not here. It's not safe outside after nightfall. We need to get to the inn."
As they hurried along the uneven path, the silence pressed down on them. The few villagers they passed had faces that looked carved from stone, their eyes darting away as if afraid to acknowledge their presence. A woman clutching a child murmured something under her breath before quickly disappearing into her home. The Black Hollow Inn was a modest structure, its wooden beams sagging under the weight of time. Inside, a fire crackled weakly in the hearth, casting long shadows across the room. A few patrons sat hunched over their drinks, their conversations in hushed tones. The innkeeper, a burly man with a weary expression, merely nodded as Elias led Thomas to a corner table.
"It started 3 months ago. First, it was just strange noises in the night. Then people began to see figures lurking at the edge of the village. By the time we realized something was terribly wrong, 2 families had vanished. Without a single sign of struggle, just gone."
"And the authorities, have they investigated?"
"They sent a constable. He stayed one night. By morning, he was gone too. No sign of him, just like the others. Since then, no one dares come here. Even the traders avoid Black Hollow. There's something else. They say the forest is waking up."
"The forest?"
"Black Hollow has always had legends about the hollow wood. They say something ancient sleeps there, something that should never be disturbed. But now, the trees whisper at night and shadows move where there should be none."
A gust of wind rattled the inn's windows, and the fire flickered violently before steadying again. The room had grown colder. Thomas exhaled, his breath misting in the dim light. "We need to see it for ourselves. Tomorrow at first light, take me to the forest."
"But if we go, we must be careful. No one who has entered the hollow wood has ever returned."
The weight of his words settled heavily between them. Outside, the wind howled through the empty streets, carrying with it the distant echo of something unnatural, a whispering voice that did not belong to the wind. The morning sun barely pierced through the thick mist that clung to the village. Thomas and Elias stood at the edge of the hollow wood, staring into the dark forest. The trees were tall and twisted, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers. The villagers had warned them not to enter, but Thomas was determined to uncover the truth.
"Are you sure about this? No one who goes in ever comes back."
"We need answers. Whatever is haunting this village, it starts here." They stepped forward. the crunch of leaves beneath their boots the only sound. As they walked deeper, the air grew heavy, filled with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something rotten. A sudden rustling made them freeze. Thomas held up a hand, signaling Elias to stay still. A shape moved between the trees. It was too fast to be an animal, too silent to be a person. Thomas felt the hairs on his neck stand up. Did you see that?
Yes, and I think it saw us too.
They pressed on, their breaths shallow. The deeper they went, the darker it became. Sunlight barely reached the forest floor, and shadows seemed to shift when they weren't looking. A low whisper drifted through the trees, soft, almost like a sigh.
Do you hear that?
Voices, but from where? They followed the sound until they reached a clearing. In the center stood an old crumbling stone altar covered in strange markings. The whispering grew louder, surrounding them. Suddenly, a chilling laugh echoed through the woods. A shadow detached itself from the trees, taking shape as it moved toward them. It was tall, its body wrapped in darkness with glowing red eyes.
What is that?
Thomas reached for the small knife in his coat, but his hands were trembling. The shadow loomed closer, its form shifting like smoke. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it stopped. Shadow, Vo, you should not have come. Who are you? What do you want?
This village belongs to the Forgotten. Leave before you join them.
The wind howled, and the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. Elias grabbed Thomas's arm. We need to go, now!
Without another word, they turned and ran. The forest twisted around them, making every path look the same. The whispers grew louder, angry. Shadows moved at the edges of their vision. Finally, they burst out of the trees, gasping for breath. The village lay ahead, eerily silent. Elias bent over, hands on his knees.
We were not supposed to survive that. Something ancient is in that forest, and it doesn't want us here. Then what do we do now?
We find out what it is, and how to stop it. Back in the village, Thomas and Elias hurried to the Black Hollow Inn. The fire in the hearth barely warmed the dim room. The few villagers inside stared at them, their faces pale with fear. The innkeeper stepped forward, wiping his hands on his apron.
You went into the Hollow Wood, didn't you? You should have never gone there. Now it knows you. A woman in the corner gasped. An elderly man shook his head. It spoke to us. We saw something. A shadow.
What is it? What's haunting this village?
The innkeeper sighed and sat down at their table.
It's an old curse. Long ago, the village did something terrible. They betrayed someone. Something. And now, the forest watches us, waits for its revenge. There was once a woman named Isolde. She lived on the edge of the forest. People feared her, called her a witch. One winter, the village suffered a terrible famine. They believed she cursed the land. So, they dragged her to the Hollow Wood and left her there to die. The innkeeper hesitated, then spoke. Who was betrayed? What happened?
But she didn't die, or at least, not in the way they thought. Her spirit became something else, something dark. Now she calls to those who enter the woods, taking them into the shadows.
And the missing villagers. The constable, they're with her?
Lost to the Hollow Wood.
There has to be a way to stop this.
The altar. It's where she draws her power. Destroy it, and maybe, just maybe, you can break the curse.
Thomas exchanged a glance with Elias. They knew what had to be done. Tomorrow they would return to the Hollow Wood. This time they would not run. The next morning, Thomas and Elias stood at the edge of the Hollow Wood, the village barely visible behind them. A heavy mist curled around the trees as if warning them to stay away. But they had no choice. The only way to save the village was to destroy the altar. Elias tightened his grip on the lantern. Are you sure about this? We barely made it out last time. Thomas nodded. If we don't stop this, more people will disappear. We have to try. They stepped into the forest. The air was thick and cold, pressing against their skin. Every step felt heavier, as if the forest itself was resisting them. Shadows slithered between the trees, whispering in voices neither of them could understand. Elias looked around nervously. "It's watching us." Thomas ignored the growing fear in his chest. "Then let's make sure it sees what we've come to do." They pushed forward, following the path they had taken the day before. The forest was different this time, darker, angrier. The trees seemed to close in around them, and then they reached the clearing. The altar stood in the center, covered in the same strange markings. The air around it shimmered, pulsing with an unseen energy. The whispers turned into wails. Elias swallowed hard. "Now what?" he asked. Thomas pulled a hammer from his bag. "We break it," he replied. As he raised the hammer, the ground trembled. A gust of freezing wind knocked them back. The shadows gathered, forming into a figure. A woman wrapped in darkness, her red eyes burning with rage. "Isolde, you dare?" Thomas struggles to his feet. "Thomas! Isolde, this has to end." Isolde tilts her head, her form shifting like smoke. "Isolde, they left me to die. I only returned the favor." Elias steps forward. "Elias, we know what happened, but punishing their children, their children's children, does that make it right?" The shadows hesitated. The forest grew still. Thomas seized the moment. He swung the hammer, shattering the altar. A scream tore through the woods, shaking the trees. The darkness around Isolde flickered. The mist thinned. The whispers faded. She looked at them one last time, sadness in her glowing eyes before vanishing into the wind. Silence fell. The forest, once heavy with fear, felt lighter. "Elias, did we do it?" "Thomas, I think it's over." They turned and walked back toward the village, leaving the haunted past behind. Thomas and Elias stepped out of the hollow wood just as the first light of dawn touched the village. The air felt different, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. The mist that had clung to the streets was gone, revealing the tired but hopeful faces of the villagers. A small crowd had gathered outside the Black Hollow Inn. When they saw Thomas and Elias, murmurs spread through the group. The innkeeper steps forward, his eyes filled with worry and hope. "Is it done?" Thomas nods. "The altar is destroyed. Isolde, she's gone. The curse is broken." A heavy silence followed his words. Then, a woman let out a sob of relief. The villagers whispered among themselves, their fear slowly giving way to cautious hope. "It's over, finally, after all these years." "So, what happens now?" "Now we rebuild, we live without fear, and we remember what was done so it never happens again." Thomas looked around at the village, at the people who had suffered for so long. He had come here for a story, but now he felt something deeper, a connection to this place, to its history, to the weight of the past and the hope of the future. As the sun rose higher, warming the rooftops of Black Hollow, the village began to stir with new life. People stepped out of their homes breathing deeply, as if tasting freedom for the first time in generations. "I think it's time for me to go." "You'll write about this, won't you? Not all stories are meant to be written, some are just meant to be lived. Then let this one be a story we never forget." With a final glance at the village, Thomas stepped into the waiting carriage. As it rolled away, he looked back one last time at Black Hollow, now bathed in the golden light of a new day. The haunted village was no longer haunted, and for the first time in years, the shadows no longer whispered.